All right. Well, it seems like we have quite a few people, so go ahead and get started. I don't have, sorry to say, a ton of news articles to cover beyond some items that over the past week or two have been posted in our Facebook. There's just not a lot of news going on. I think kind of remote ID kind of saturated the news cycle. Um, and after that, there wasn't a ton going on. However, um, one of the biggest pieces of news is going to be the FAA. And again, we posted this in our Facebook. Has given $5.8 million in research grants for various different kind of research initiatives. And these are all going to universities. But some of the key things to note in here is some risk type assessment, which I feel like this should have been from before remote ID, but it'll be interesting. Some of them are like a UAS engine ingestion test. So if a UAS gets sucked into an engine, what kind of damage are we looking at? Um, Mid-air collision likelihood, looking at small UAS and their potential to um, collide with a manned aircraft. And then the biggest one I think that we are most excited about is shielded operations. Um, the University of North Dakota is the lead university on that, and they join Kansas State University, Embry-Riddle, New Mexico State University, and North Carolina State University. So for those who don't know, shielded operations is essentially if you're flying in an area and you're staying below the highest object or the tallest object in your vicinity, then you should be able to fly without much of any restrictions, essentially.
Yeah, it sure
So,
seems like some of this should have been done a long time ago.
yeah, I know. I totally agree with you.
I'm also very curious, what if some of it turns out like the mid-air collision likelihood turns out to be basically zero? Would they change any regulations based on that?
I don't know. And that's something
Seems
that,
unlikely, but
so well, I mean, one of the key things is that we as an organization, being the FPVFC, will keep a close eye on what comes out of these research initiatives. Because that type of data will help fuel future suggestions and kind of talking points with the FAA.
do you think
So,
the data will be public, or will it require a Freedom of Information Act to get it? Or
well, I mean, they did publish the previous Assure grant data, so I'm
okay.
thinking that it's going to go public. But again, if we need to go that route, we'll go that route. Um, so I definitely think that quite a few of these are going to be ones we want to watch. So
Yeah,
mid-air collision, the ingestion, because those are going to be the risk-based assessments, and then obviously shielded UAS. If that turns out, amazingly well, which I can't imagine that it doesn't, then that's going to be something that we want to push for um, going forward, and especially in 2023 when the FAA Reauthorization Act comes up again. So it's going to be a pretty big deal.
so I'm
Dave,
the
you
other.
had something?
I'm always the optimistic about things like this, and of course, we recommended shielded operations back in the UAS facility maps DAC session, and there was no mention of it in the response. So we are going to go back to the FAA, and here we find that they've taken action on it. That's great,
Mhm.
and I'm optimistic. And one way of following up on this is I've got the homework assignment that I'm going to see if I can find someone at the University of North Dakota. I mean, how many people can there be in that school?
Right.
It's in North Dakota. Probably less than one of the boroughs of Manhattan.
Yeah. And I mean, the cool thing with this is it's been limited to a couple of key. A lot of the same universities are working on a lot of the same, or working on the different tasks. So if we make point of contact with one, we can probably open up point of contacts to several of the others. So like Embry Riddle's on several of these, especially the key ones. And let's see, University of Kansas, and so quite a few different key points that we definitely want to look at on taking some of this stuff even further. So pretty big deal there. Questions, comments?
Isn't CDRA from University of North Dakota? They, I'm sure we could contact the Jordan from CDRA, Collegiate
Okay.
Drone Racing Association.
Okay. Well, I didn't know that, but
He's
that's awesome.
he's right there at University of North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan, who is that?
I don't know how to pronounce the last name. Krueger.
Okay.
He's the
Krueger?
president of the CDRA.
Uh-huh.
Krueger. So.
Okay.
All right. Perfect.
Cool. Good.
Have you guys heard of ACAS X? It's similar to what shielded UAS ops detect and avoid subject there on that website.
Uh-huh.
says.
Yeah, yes, we have.
Yeah, that sounds very, very similar to what I mean. I don't understand what the difference. And APL is actually helping the UAS integration office with that. So they first did it on like big group 5 type drones, but now they're doing it on small UAS. So yeah,
Nice.
because
Okay.
it's like ACAS X is like TCAS, newer version of TCAS, aircraft collision avoidance system, I guess is what it stands for. So
Well, if you need anybody to
Awesome.
go visit them in person, just let me know. It's just a short little 4-hour drive for me to get up there.
That's
Nice.
awesome.
Okay.
Although it may feel like a 12-hour drive in the middle of the winter.
Or should we say okie dokie?
Right. Yeah, sure.
So it'll be interesting. I think one of the things we need to do, Dave and Dan, is get in touch with somebody there, see when they're going to spool these research tasks up, and then see if we can either provide information, help, or get some ideas of the direction that they're going on, that kind of stuff. That'd be
Right, and I've got to Elias's point. I do need to do some homework on AKSX and see if there is a difference, and certainly, and I've got an MIT paper that digs into this. So yeah, I think I'm not. I don't. I just want to circle back to that because I'm taking notes, and that is one of the areas to look into on this whole topic. Yep.
All right. So next up is AirMap. So I don't know how much of you have stayed up to date on this, but AirMap published a series of tweets basically suggesting, I can't speak today, I'm sorry, that the airspace, namely UTM, should be monetized. And this is something that we kind of talked about from the beginning of discussion of UTMs, and some of the potential issues with remote ID was that it was seeking to monetize the airspace. So they've, obviously faced a bunch of backlash over this, with pilots, calling to boycott AirMap, and um, you know, removing the app from their phone, and all that kind of fun stuff. So, um, and AirMap has been kind of historically, it mentions in the article, hostile to the idea of open skies. And so, monetization of the airspace is definitely a net negative for just about everybody except for those who are in control of the UTMs. We get that, the whole UTM dichotomy is going to be centered around some kind of monetization, but at this current point in time, hobbyists, and I mean, with the lack of network requirement for remote ID, UTM is not a money making venture, except for when it comes to large fleets
And when
looking
we
to do
when we
go ahead.
when we look at companies like Kitty Hawk, who has since they've been working with the FAA on Before You Fly, and their Kitty Hawk
Mhm.
version of their flight approval system is free to hobbyists, which to me is a great thing to
Mhm.
encourage. I'm all about making money and for profit and figuring out the right businesses, but yeah, there are situations where I think none of us are happy with AirMap, and as Matt mentioned, one of our um, DAC members suggested that we boycott AirMap, and that was Vic Moss. And Vic, of course, is we're working closely with Vic Moss and Inji Sugahara with their Drone Service Provider Alliance, and
Mhm.
I'm one of the advisory board members to that organization. So yeah, it's a good group, and yeah, this is AirMap is a company that we're disappointed that they continue to take this path.
It's something I heard on the SUAS news stream the other day as they were talking about AirMap, and they said originally AirMap was launched as an app called No Fly Zone, and their idea was businesses and maybe residential
Mhm.
areas could mark their property as no fly zones, and you would pay this app company to tell drones that they can't fly over your property. So from the
Yeah.
beginning, they've been all about monetizing the airspace.
So I didn't know that about the no fly zone. I've heard about the company called No Fly Zone, and I knew that's what they did, but I didn't know that they
Yep,
potentially
I believe
started with
that turned
that.
into AirMap.
yep,
That's
that's
interesting.
that's correct. And geez, too bad it didn't make him money.
All right. Yeah. Well, I mean, definitely. I mean, the key point that the article does make, however, is that while currently there is no network requirement for remote ID, the remote ID didn't exactly close the door to that. So,
Yep.
um, it says at this time that at this time the rule will only finalize broadcast-based remote identification. So it's definitely something to watch. And you know I feel like our hobby is expensive enough. I don't want to pay to just take off. That's a bad idea.
And I was joking, like, how many flights do you have when you do a race or when you're out freestyling?
Oh
Or
my
if you
god.
crash and you bounce, do you have to pay for every time you bounce off the ground?
I
Each
love
of
the way
those
your
are
mind works, Dan.
each of those are landings and takeoffs, or what?
How much for
That's
that dirt divot?
Right.
right.
Wait, I only crash, so I'm not landing.
Yeah.
Take off once, only crash.
Oh my
Okay.
goodness. So the other thing that's key to point out is that AirMap has lobbied significantly for localization of, drone regulations, which is obviously um, something that we don't want to, look at. So
Yeah.
because the more localized drone regulations are, um, the harder it is to keep track of what's going on across the United States. It's easier to follow one set of rules than it is to follow, a different rule for every county, state, town that you're in. It just makes it a patchwork of regulation, and it's just a hot mess. So,
Does that lead into
And
the
open
story in New York where they're trying to say you can't
from
create regulations like that?
yes,
from
actually, it does. Look at
the
that
New York
segue.
the New York regulation looks fine to me, but the one that does not look fine is New Mexico, and there's another. I think it was a southeast state, but yeah, for once, I looked at the New York State Senate legislation, and I'm supportive of it. It's
Yeah.
looks like, yeah, fine, and because mostly with the New York State Senate regulation or law, there's not a reg, will if they pass it, will institute that it says you will follow federal laws. So they look at federal FAA regulations as the guiding practice, and then they add a couple of things because it's New York and they can't leave well enough alone. But it was reasonably positive. So I'm supportive of that one. However,
Yeah.
the New Mexico one is really problematic, and that's Vic Moss and the 107 guys are trying to get themselves organized to see what they can do to get the folks in New Mexico to contact their state legislators and let them know that this is not a good piece of legislation in New Mexico.
Yeah. The New York State one is very close to what it is here in Arizona, and basically says, the state will determine UAS, regulation and law, and it preempts everything else. And so basically, the different counties and cities can't make rules and regulations regarding UAS. It all falls down to the state. So very much similar to how it is in the state of Arizona. And it just seems like the most common sense to just point back to the federal regulations and then take it from there. So
Yeah. Yeah, Texas has some onerous
they've got some interesting
legislation.
privacy
Yes,
legislation that's
exactly.
problematic for sure. Yeah. Let's see. Did that. Let's see. I only have two more, and again, I'm sorry. It's just a slow news cycle week for UAS. So Wingcopter has raised 22 million. This is a German drone company. And so this is all venture capital, and they are looking to expand their operations into Kentucky, I do believe. I did go to their website and look at their career section. They are hiring people in Kentucky, mostly like director of operations and stuff like that for the time being. But I'm sure once they get kind of situated in there possibly will be some drone jobs for the folks in that area. They mostly do commercial. Well, they're primarily based commercial medical supply delivery. Um, and let's see. They're essentially right now they're focused on just being an equipment manufacturer. However, they are looking to move into service as well. So they will start cycling that up. So $22 million is nothing to sneeze at, but we'll see what goes on there. They operate, it's basically a tilt rotor design. So it's a quadcopter with tilt rotors, and then once it gets to altitude, it switches into forward wing based flight. So
That's an interesting approach for that
yeah.
problem. I definitely
So
want to fly something like that has two modes, both a hover and then a high
yeah.
speed forward.
So they have, I think, let's see. So the heavy lift model can fly up to 75 miles at speeds up to 100 miles an hour and can carry payloads of about 13 pounds. So that's not a small
Ooh,
payload.
wow.
So
I appreciate the savvy up to 100 miles an hour.
right.
United States speed limit for UAS 100 miles an hour. Well played.
So from the images in the let me copy this from the images in the article. It looks like they have a pod situated on the underside of the fuselage there, and that would be kind of the cargo pod.
Yeah,
Um,
I bet the to Millipede's question, I bet the center of gravity gets rather important on this aircraft.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to know how that pod is set up on the inside to kind of accommodate that.
Mhm.
Can you transport liquids or things that roll around in there?
It could get a little sketchy.
Maybe
Yeah,
we
we
put
got-
some
Um,
beans in there or something, or ball bearings.
yeah, something to distribute the weight. Yeah, that'd be interesting. So, and then it says that it is also looking into. They're going to be introducing a new model of drone soon with different capabilities. So, but they are going to be offering a drones as a service business as well, or they're looking to, I would say. So, let's see. And last but not least, I do have this. So, FAA approves beyond visual line of sight drone operations without visual observers. So, the FAA has made its first approval of automated drone operations without human pilots or observers on site. They use an aerial intelligence platform called the Scout system, which uses acoustic detect and avoid technology and a layered redundant safety algorithm created by American Robotics to conduct beyond visual line of sight flights in the national airspace. So the
That-
current oh, go ahead.
This just underscores how, in my opinion, where the FAA is going with beyond visual line of sight, which
Mhm.
is it's going to be redundant. It's going to have a lot of capabilities. It is going to have detect and avoid capability, and so very different from our recreational drones. And so this is an area that I think we're going to see as off limits for us flying recreational.
And legally doing what almost everybody who has ever done a mission planner plan has ever done in the past,
Mm-hmm.
recreationally for a really long time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see. We've got the Scout system employs multiple risk mitigations, including advanced real-time sensors and algorithms that provide various safety and reliability functions, including detect and avoid of other aircraft and obstacles, automated real-time system diagnostics and fail-safes, and automated flight mission management. And this comes from Aviation Today. Let's see.
And TextJet is telling us that it's painted orange, and therefore that's the detect and avoid. Okay, TextJet, I'm forgetting what U.S. Car manufacturer painted their blocks orange. It was. I bet he knows. Oh man. Okay,
Isn't
it's back in the '60s.
was that Mopar that did that?
I think it was. I'm thinking Mopar.
I think it
That's
was.
a
Why they
couple of
called it
Mopar.
Dodge, so you could see them.
Yep. All right. So that's kind of what I have. I don't have anything else. Dave, did you want to talk a little bit about your conversation the other day?
Sure. I think the one point, and so we'll be updating the remote ID document that's out on our website. If you took a look at it, you'll see that there are two sections which relate to 89.115A and B. And what's important about those is they describe sentences or some sentences that characterize the person operating the controls of the aircraft must be able to see the UAS at all times. So it tells you about visual line of sight, but there's no additional or parenthetical description about, well, how about FPV and how about a visual observer? And if you take a look at Part 107, or you look at 88409 for recreational, there is that type of description. And so we took this to the FAA, and we went high. So we're talking to executives in Washington D.C., and they assured us that this is not an issue. So what we were worried is there an intent to do away with FPV? And they were emphatic that there is not an intent, and we talked quite a bit after after this single point about the amount of work and the amount of response that the FAA made, and the point they wanted to make is they spent more time on recreational than any other single community, and I think that's entirely appropriate in as much as there are 1.2 million recreational UAS in the United States, and no one other constituent comes close. They're tracking about 500,000 commercial. So to us, a positive. We were all pretty sure that that's the answer we would get, but it was so important that we wanted to make sure that that was the case. We also asked questions about 89501, which has to do with manufacture and intent, and this one is a little more vague. We do have back on the 89115, there may be some a request for an advisory circular for clarity on that. Some of the folks are still a little concerned that we're taking the FAA at their word, and this was the top of the UAS integration office. So this was. We didn't, this is not to disparage any of the folks in the field offices or drone pros, but this was important enough that we wanted to go to the folks who were responsible for the rules.
Yeah, I'm definitely one of those people that would like to see that in writing at some point from the FAA before remote ID goes into effect.
Yep. Yeah, and so that's something we will keep track, and we'll follow up to see if we are getting an advisory circular on that. The other point was we brought up the fact that right now there is no recreational representation on the DAC. We had Rich Hansen from the AMA was on the DAC, and he's no longer. And of course, DJI, while a manufacturer, not an operator, has been a fantastic supporter of recreational as well as commercial. And they're no longer. Brendan Schulman was on the DAC and is no longer. So it's great that two of our colleagues, Kenji Sukahara and Vic Moss, are new DAC members. Of course, their focus is Part 107. But they have also reached out, and they're trying to help us wherever they can in terms of recreational and FPV. So that's positive. In addition, the FAA folks encouraged us to keep my application on file, and they said there are always people leaving, departing. So stay tuned. So we'll keep at it, and this won't change the work we are doing. Would be nice to have a seat on the DAC. That would give us the opportunity to recommend new tasking groups, as well as be able to vote and to be able to speak up during a DAC meeting. Right now, when we attend a DAC meeting as a volunteer, we have to keep quiet. So, and this is a standard practice for an advisory council. I just see text jets. So a VO is optional. Nope, a VO is not optional. If we're flying FPV, one of the ways that one of the folks characterized the remote ID rule is that they said it's operating rule agnostic. So it does not take precedent over 88409 recreational exception or Part 107. So as we see the need for a visual observer for both FPV with 107 or Part 107 or with recreational, that's still the case. No changes there.
So the reason they need to have that in the remote ID rule is because it sounds like they plan in the future to get rid of some of those requirements that are currently out there so that those commercial beyond visual line of sight flights can be done.
And one of the things that I want to do as we're working with the Drone Advisory Committee is we're working to get more of the members behind a set of goggles. And so we want them to try FPV, and we want to circle back on the point that we made in our response to the remote ID NPRM, which is when you put on a set of goggles, your situational awareness is heightened, not decreased, with respect to those of us who fly model airplanes, and you're struggling to see orientation of a little speck in the sky. It's sure a lot better when you've got goggles and you're sitting in the cockpit. Albeit, I get it with respect to peripheral vision, etc. But I think there's a point to be made there, and the argument that I'm making is it's far better than having a VO.
And you could
visual
certainly make the
observer.
argument that it's better than being in many manned aircraft.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Especially since you can
coming
actually hear
yes,
something.
FPV is way easier, especially on a cloudy day when your plane is
Sky
colored. Yes, I have done that. I thought it would be a great idea to cover a sport plane in silver monochrome. Boy, was that a mistake.
So, one of the things, I'd like to kind of reiterate, kind of hash out, but, we did make this point in our response that, situational awareness is actually extremely good, and we can all, anybody can make the argument, well, you don't know what's behind you. Yeah, but the ability to turn on point with a quadcopter, especially, is massive. I mean, it's so fast, it's ridiculous. So, and if any of you have not done this, and I highly recommend you do just for the experience, but take a pilot exploration trip. Basically, you pay you get to go up in like a Cessna or something like that. You get to fly for about an hour, but you get to actually experience what the visual acuity of a pilot is in an aircraft, and it's very limiting. I got to do this, and it was amazing how little you could actually see. In fact, half of what you're looking at is essentially the dashboard of the plane. um, and you kind of have to kind of peek your head up over it just to see anything. um, but your situational awareness is unlimited in regards to a certain degree, depending on what your field of view is on your camera that's on your drone. I mean, anywhere from 120 to 150 degrees. um, but being able to see that far, or that big of a piece of the sky, is amazing, and in comparison to a pilot, it's just unmatched to a manned pilot, I would say.
What kind of
So,
airplane were you in?
oh god, I want to say it was some kind of Cessna, but it was a while ago.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was definitely fun, and it was cool, being able to fly a plane. And the funny part to me, totally off subject, but the funny part to me is how little you actually had to manipulate the controls when you're actually up flying. It definitely doesn't take a whole lot, and I mean, it's easier than driving a car. I mean, in some regards. But yeah.
That's the magic behind it, brother. Mastering the least amount of input you have to do to be able to get what you need done is master that is actually really hard. Initially, yeah, it's easy, maybe it looks like, but to
Oh,
finesse
I can
that the right
imagine.
way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, mastering it, I'm sure, is absolutely, a whole nother ball game. I've done this
Yeah.
once, and but it's definitely experience, and it actually doesn't cost a whole lot, so it's definitely something I recommend. It definitely made me want to get my, uh, private pilot's license. So, um,
Part of it has to also do with most of general aviation aircraft are statically and dynamically stable as well.
mhm.
If you guys know what that means. So, from an aerospace engineering perspective, when they design the aircraft, right? So it's just you
Yeah,
let go of the airplane, and a lot of the time it will recover itself if you're in a stall, or
yeah.
you stuff like that. Yeah.
So I do want to, talk about what TextJet is talking about. So, if you're flying FPV, let's talk about visual observer and FPV. So, if you're flying FPV, obviously you have the goggles over your face, and while the argument can be made about your situational awareness, regulations currently state that you have to have unaided view, or unaided line of sight to your aircraft, to your unmanned aircraft. Um, so your spotter can't be wearing a set of goggles. It's not enough that they can just take them off and find it, because your situational awareness, if you think about it, your situational awareness going from the goggles to line of sight is definitely hindered, because it's not easy to discover from taking off the goggles to finding the drone in the sky. Um, is not a quick thing to do. That's, I mean, if anybody's ever tried to do that, like, if your VTX has failed or something, which I definitely have, it's very difficult to figure out where your aircraft actually is.
So where you might be
Uh,
getting confused there, TextJet, Josh is talking about the current regulations for flying FPV. Remote
yes.
ID does not change the regulations that are currently existing for flying FPV and the requirements of having a visual observer. They just also mention that the pilot has to have the ability to see the aircraft at all times. And that will
Mhm.
come into effect in 2023 when the remote ID stuff comes into play.
Right. So LOS has not been removed. So if you're flying line of sight, if you are actually flying line of sight and you're not flying FPV, you don't need a visual observer, because you are the visual observer and the pilot in command. So, um, yeah, I hope that clarifies it a little bit. So, essentially what happened with remote ID is they put in this extra little bit of language, but what they did not do, and they chose not to do, is to define um what visual line of sight is in the article, so, or in the regulation. So it falls back to the previous definition. So if you are, okay, so I'll say it again: if you are flying line of sight, um then you do not need a visual observer, okay, because you are the visual observer. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, that
And
makes sense.
if you're
And,
flying
and
FPV, you need somebody sitting next to you watching you.
Yeah,
right.
and they have to be
And,
co-located, so they can't be out 500 meters from you. um you can't have somebody out, 5 meters and talking to you via walkie
Yeah.
with you.
And also just
Um,
right.
something to keep in mind that the FAA wants those standard compliant remote ID drones to be able to fly beyond visual line of sight. So they
mhm.
will need to change the existing regulations, but they haven't done that yet.
Yes, and that rule will stand until they change the initial definition of visual line of sight. And the initial definition is in the FAA Reauthorization Act. So until that changes, we don't know what the rule will be. We imagine that for certain scenarios, it may change for beyond visual line of sight. I don't, at
Like
this current point in time, I can't say that it's going to change for recreational.
you could just imagine if they totally get rid of line of sight rules right now, and when we get to the remote ID stage, remote ID has some visual line of sight rules. The standard remote ID will be able to fly beyond visual line of sight. Anybody with a module or flying FPV with a home built aircraft will have rules that say you have to have a visual line of sight, or you have to have a visual observer, or you have to follow what that remote ID rule says about being able to see your drone.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. It can be a little confusing, but I mean, the easy way to put it is, if you're flying line of sight, you don't need a visual observer. If you're flying FPV, you do.
And the FAA seems to want that forever, for the most part.
I mean, I guess the point of view, I mean, for me, I'm not a big FPV person. I mainly fly line of sight.
Right.
And so from my point of view, I see it as, okay, if I'm flying in goggles, I get it. You have a clear, nice picture, you have a nice field of view, but I guess I guess what I'm trying to say is you can still have, I feel like you have sometimes maybe less situational awareness, especially if there's another vehicle coming from a direction where you can't see them on the lens.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the lens is like, it's like a video, right? So you can't see very, like, you can't zoom. Well, I mean, most of them don't have zoom in capabilities where like, hey, what's that little dot, or noticing a little dot, which could be another UAS in front of you, but sometimes you can't tell. Maybe it's just a bird, maybe it's something else.
Right,
So
but I
hopefully
see
a
where
visual
you
observer can differentiate between that maybe a little easier instead of looking at it through a camera lens.
right, and but I think a lot of that, there's a couple different things. I would say, and this is not to pick on analog people because I fly analog. Analog cameras are not the best resolution, although there are some very good resolution cameras for the FPV market out there. But I think with HD video, with DJI or Fat Shark's Shark Bite or whatever it's called, those open up a little more resolution to what's happening in your field of vision. Second to that, we're making the comparison, I think, to a manned pilot versus you know, a pilot of an FPV drone, not so much the differentiation between a visual observer and FPV. That makes sense. So we're comparing the situational awareness capabilities between the different types of pilots, I think.
And you have to figure out
And
where do you want to draw the line? Where is the risk? Where do you make
yeah,
the risk acceptable? So if you have one visual observer, that helps. But if you have three, that helps even more. Why isn't there a rule that says you have to have three visual observers looking in every direction? Because that
right.
would then reduce the risk even more.
Yeah. So
To me, there's also, if you're flying a video drone, whether it's a nice Mavic or Parrot or whatever, they tend to move a little more slowly, and the latency is pretty high. And so compare that to an FPV racing drone, and these things are like little Formula Ones in the sky. And I thought, oh boy, how am I going to be able to see? And I'm worried about my peripheral vision, and this camera is in a fixed direction. Well, not an issue. The darn things move so fast that you can see. What if you want to see what's behind you? You can see. You can flip that thing around instantaneously,
yeah,
and the low latency, provides a direct linkage to your brain so fast. So I'd be the first to agree that yeah, there's an issue with if the link is broken, that's a big issue. However, when that video link is working, it's amazing.
yeah, and it also depends on the rates you fly too. Like when I'm flying freestyle, I mean, my rates are set up at I think it's about 1,000 degrees per second. So I mean, I can flip my quad 1,000 degrees in a second. So flipping it 180 degrees is piece of cake. So it's
Fractions of
near
a second.
instantaneous. Yeah, it's near instantaneous. So, and plus, you're not just relying on your vision either. You're relying on your hearing as well, because you know 9 times out of 10 you're going to hear something in the area before you can even know that it's there, and it's going to be a far enough distance away.
And not to mention,
So
getting back to shielded operations, you're almost always flying below the height of the
exactly,
tallest building or trees around.
yeah. So there's a couple of fair points to
There's
make.
soft targets, really, at that point.
Yes, absolutely.
But you don't
Really
really hear
looking
the
at it.
FAA talking about that as a reason for the rules. They're talking about
Not
avoiding
either.
manned aviation and integrating into
Right.
the airspace, not avoiding people on the ground.
Yeah, and 1T is correct. You're constantly changing directions, whether you're flying racing or whether you're flying freestyle. I mean, you're very rarely going in one direction for more than a second or two, and so it's definitely pretty interesting. Some definite fair arguments to be made either. So yeah, it is an old argument, but it's one that we feel strongly about, and I
Yeah,
don't think it's
and
wrong to rehash
the
it.
point. Yeah, the point with that. Why did I bring it up? Because if we can get people on the deck to try FPV, if they can buy into this notion, then our next step is to try to do away with the visual observer requirement.
Hmm.
That's what the long. This is the long push. This is not
Yeah,
going to happen overnight.
no,
Thing
but yeah,
too that you can bring up potentially line of sight once you get a certain distance. I have no idea. I mean, I have no idea how close I am to that object. FPV, I 100% know where I am in relation to that object.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like turning on final in a model airplane. It's like, am I in front of those trees, behind those trees, above
Yeah.
those trees?
I mean,
Yeah.
and more power to people who can fly line of sight. I can, but it requires a completely open field with no obstacles whatsoever. So, like the farm field next to my house, yeah, that's where I'm going to be flying line of sight because, like Steve was saying, it's very difficult for me to work out where I am in relation to the objects around me, and it's just a bad thing altogether. Um, so yeah, and orientation is another thing. That's something that you have to, as you're flipping and turning your quad, you have to maintain that visual inside your head. And, to be honest, I'm not very good at it. So I generally don't fly line of sight unless I'm like doing a hover test. And like I can hover in front of me, I can do flips, I can, do all that kind of stuff. But as soon as it gets more than like 15 feet off the ground, I'm just like, nope, land.
Where are my goggles? Right.
Yeah, exactly. So the only thing that I can fly relatively decent line of sight is a fixed wing, and but even that, it's like, yeah, I'm going to do that in an open field. But with FPV, I mean, I can fly proximity with a wing, diving under trees and through gazebos and stuff like that. And but don't ever ask me to do that line of sight because that's not going to happen.
When I do things line of sight, just you know, and I've done long far operations like half mile visual line of sight stuff. But what I do, even though you don't have to have it, and the regulations say you have to have, you should be able to see it as a dot in the sky, which is really it's a bad written rule, right? It should be, hey, you should be able to. It should be written in a way where it's you should be able to see it enough so you can be able to tell orientation and be able to bring it back safely is the way it should be worded. So right now it's not like that. It just says you can go as far as you want, as long as you see it as a dot.
Yeah, there's no distance requirement. Yeah,
it's bullshit in my opinion. But what I do
Well,
to
it's an
mitigate
interesting.
that is I put a visual observer myself. I pick a couple visual observers in strategic spots when I want to fly far away, and if there's obstacles around or whatever the case may be, I do put visual observers around, and they're talking to me on the phone or they're talking to me on walkie-talkie, right? And they're giving me call outs and based on what I asked them to tell me. So there are ways around it, but yeah, just realize that that's kind of what we do in the line of sight world when we want to go far.
Yeah, your primary visual observer though needs to be co-located. So, but
not in the line of sight world.
that's what the regulations state. But
No,
nope.
only if you're FPV.
Only if you're FPV.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I put them out at distance. So I'm flying half a mile to a mile away. Yeah, I'll be able to still visually see that thing, but I'm not. And it takes it takes a long time to be able to train. If you're just doing it on your own, flying far away, to be able to train yourself, whether it's a quad or fixed wing, slightly different. It's actually easier with a quad because you can just stop and then figure out, which way you're going, even if you're far away and you lose orientation. Fixed wing is a lot harder to do that with because it just keeps going and it's a lot harder to recover when you're flying long distances and you lose orientation and you're trying to bring it back.
You just you dip a wing. It's a little aileron.
Right.
Right. I mean, it does. I mean,
that's the trick.
Yeah, it is. And, even further, the other thing for us FPV pilots is when if we're flying line of sight, most of us are going to be flying without auto level. So we can't just stop. So we are more like a fixed wing in that kind of scenario. We could flip a switch and go into, level mode, but most of us are flying completely freehand. So stopping is not really always an option for
if
for
you're flying in acro, you're basically flying in acro. Yeah, you can't do that. But if you're flying in stabilized, then you can.
Yeah, we can, and we can flip that switch, but
Yep.
if you've got that set up. By the way, Dan just posted a link to Quad Mover. This guy, if you've never watched any of his videos, he's an insane line of sight pilot. The dude has the best reaction times ever, and he's one of those guys that knows exactly where his quad is in his
Yeah.
mind.
I would say he's not doing it
Um,
line of sight. He's doing it just in his brain.
It is. He is. I mean, it's insane. So, I definitely recommend watching a couple of his videos because, yeah, he's crazy. All right. So, wow, we really stretched that topic a long way. Thank you, guys. Thank you for making up for my inability to find good news articles.
Do you know how much that Wingcopter article, that Wingcopter from Germany, costs? I didn't see a actual cost on that.
Let me. I did not look that up, but hang on one second.
If they're actually bringing it to the U.S., I'm just curious how much it would cost for us to buy one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Looking at
Solution.
pictures of it, I mean, this thing is not small. It's probably
No.
like 50 grand or something.
Let's see. Groceries and food. It looks like you need to request a quote. So I'm gonna say it's probably gonna be fairly expensive.
Yeah. You probably build
Anytime
one.
they say, yeah, request a quote, yeah,
Yeah.
you're looking at something.
Especially if it
fairly
goes 100 miles per. Yeah.
100 miles per hour, 75-mile range.
That's gonna be
Yeah,
expensive.
it is going to be
And tilt
expensive.
rotor.
Yeah. I mean, the
I mean,
cool thing with it is you're expending most of your energy getting it up to altitude. And then once you're there, I mean, you've got your, it looks like it's puller. So your front
yeah.
two is pulling the aircraft as opposed to pushing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's
So
definitely
I
pretty
fly a
interesting.
hybrid for work. It's called a Lynx VTOL, and it's a similar concept, except it's not tilt rotor. It has a prop in the front with
And they just fold
four,
up, yeah.
and it has four for the quad. So it takes off, lands vertically,
Yeah.
and then it turns off the quad motors and turns on the front, the puller.
Yeah.
So, and it does that, nice and seamlessly. That is a if you guys want to look that up, I think that's like an 18 grand it cost us for one unit. Comes in a nice
Wow.
carrying case and everything. But
Yeah, yeah.
Jeez, I need to
Cool.
start building drones.
I mean, that's not even hard. That, to me, that doesn't even sound tricky.
All right, guys. Any more questions, comments before I wrap us up for the evening? Dave, you got anything else, sir?
Nothing else here. Thank you. It was a good evening.
Yep. Dan?
No, I don't think so.
All right, Alex?
And David, we wish good luck with the
Nothing.
server rebuild.
Fun times. All right, guys. Well, let's see. No idea how long the shielded operation studies will last, 1T. However, we will do our due diligence and see if we can get in contact with somebody involved with that and give you some, come back with some idea of what that's going to look like.
We will definitely
be
share
fantastic.
anything we learn if we learn anything about it.
Yeah, because we are heavily vested in shielded operations. It's a big one. All right, guys. Thank you for this
Request?
evening. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Is that my membership had expired. I think I only got like one email on it. Not going to be spammed, but more
Okay, I thought we had
would be good.
Okay, I thought we had it set up where it sends one at like 30 days, one at 15, one at 7, and then one like 7 days after it expires. I will take a look and see if that's going. I do know for the first people who signed, if you were one of the first people to sign up when we first started that we had some issues with some of those folks. So if you were one of those, I
So-
apologize. Yeah.
Yeah, there
But,
should be a lot of
emails, yeah.
people with their 1 year coming up right about now.
Yeah. So we will take a look at that, and thank you for letting us know. All right. Well, with that, guys, thank you, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.